All right, today we're going to test and review the Winegard YA7000D full band outdoor TV antenna. For the most part, this antenna is assembled out of the box. The mast clamp is already tightly riveted to the boom. All you have to do is unfold most of the elements and lock them in place. The only part you actually have to attach would be the 75 ohm transformer, and if you wish, the low VHF extension elements, and those attach with a coupler sleeve and a couple of nuts and bolts. There are pre-drilled holes. All you have to do is slide the elements in place, line up the holes, and tighten them down. The YA7000D also comes with this mounting arm. This is actually a satellite dish mounting arm, but for small to medium outdoor antennas, this type of installation can be a good option in some cases. This is a full band TV antenna, meaning that it will pick up all of the RF channels used for over-the-air broadcast television, channels 2 through 36. The front part here is for the UHF stations, 14 to 36. The middle section here is for the Hi-VHF channels 7 through 13, and these longer extension elements on the back here cover low VHF channels 2 through 6. Keep in mind that if you don't have any low VHF stations broadcasting in your area, or you have some but don't need to receive them, you can always opt to leave these low VHF extension elements off the antenna, and it will still pick up all of the channels on high VHF and UHF RF channels 7 through 36, which is realistically where most broadcast channels are nowadays. Size-wise, this antenna is 37 inches long, and it's a low profile. It's only about 3 inches high. All of the size comes from these longer low VHF extension elements. In fact, the back ones here measure 100 inches across. Now, if you don't want to use those low VHF extensions and just use this as a high VHF UHF TV antenna, you can leave those off, and that reduces the size of this antenna greatly. In fact, it's only 35 inches wide with those low VHF extensions not used. The build quality of this antenna is very good. All of the parts are either riveted or bolted tightly to the boom. It's made of mostly metal, with plastic only being used where necessary, like for these insulators that separate the elements from the main boom. And for these longer VHF elements, the insulators are longer and wider with reinforced corners to prevent these long VHF elements from sagging. So overall, a well-built antenna. Something I'd like to see improved on this antenna is getting rid of this 75 ohm transformer and maybe replacing it with some kind of a coax connector inside a plastic enclosure. I think that would make that a little more durable and way less susceptible to wind and strain, because these are notorious for breaking over time. To test this antenna, I mounted it in the usual spot, 17 feet in the air, facing the broadcast signal. I'm about 7 miles from the broadcast towers in my area, and all of the stations transmit on the VHF band. Welcome to over-the-air television in Canada. Let's see how this YA7000D does with these VHF signals. Well, some very impressive signal strength tests with this Winegard YA7000D. Low VHF channel 2 CKPR had one of the highest signal strengths I can recall for any antenna. The only antenna that was able to pick this channel up with this type of signal strength was the Televes DATBOSS mix with low VHF extensions. You can see the signal is hovering anywhere from the mid 70s up into the low 80s. Excellent for VHF channel 2. CHFD RF channel 4, again on the low VHF band, also had a very good signal strength, especially for this channel, as it is a little trickier to pick up anywhere from the high 60s to the low 70s. And RF channel 9 TVO, unfortunately they're not offering an EPG program guide with their signal anymore these days, had a very strong signal right in the low to mid 80s. On Winegard's website, the mileage rating for this antenna is 70 miles, and I feel like that's too high. maybe under perfect conditions with no obstructions, strong broadcast signals, and a preamp, that might be possible. I feel like 40 miles is probably a more reasonable range claim for this particular model. Now, if you're looking for an antenna that can pick up signals a longer distance than that, then I would suggest getting something bigger with more elements. For example, Televes has the DATBOSS Mix LR with low VHF capability. That has a built-in preamp as well, but that antenna is on a totally different plane than this one here. This antenna would be excellent if you live in a city or suburban setting, anywhere around 40 miles from the broadcast towers. If you're in the further suburbs away from signals, then that might be okay too, but about 40 miles is probably best for this antenna. You could always add a preamp to it if you need to stabilize those signals a little more, but this antenna is definitely not what I would call a deep fringe antenna. It's more of a city suburban type antenna. It's easy enough to dismiss the low VHF TV band as a whole for over-the-air television. In a lot of places, it's simply used for low power religious stations, channels that might not necessarily be desirable or as popular as other ones. But the reality is, in some major TV markets, low VHF channels are still utilized for stations that are popular or more desirable, probably stations that people would want to receive if they're going to go to the trouble of putting up a TV antenna. Some examples: New York City uses channel 3 for MeTV Tunes, as well as some other Weigel networks. Philadelphia uses channel 6 for 6ABC WPVI. Most people that pick that up are probably using an antenna that is capable of low VHF, unless they're really close to the broadcast towers. Another example in Philadelphia, MeTV Tunes is carried on RF channel 2. In the Las Vegas market, same thing. RF channel 2 is used for the Weigel networks, MeTV and MeTV Tunes. These are must-have channels for most people. In other markets, some major networks are carried on low VHF stations as well. So it's easy enough to rule out low VHF coverage on your TV antenna, but in some places, it might be necessary to have an antenna like this with longer elements meant to pick up those low VHF channels 2 through 6, because some of the most desirable channels are still on low VHF. The reasons for that probably have to do a lot with budgeting and with the incentive auction that happened a few years ago. Some stations took a lot of money to move to low VHF stations, making it more difficult for viewers to pick their channels up. Fortunately, companies like Winegard still make antennas like this, and this particular model, the YA7000D, actually represents a good value for the price. You're getting low VHF extensions that you can add on to the antenna. Other companies like Channel Master sell low VHF extension elements as an add-on for some of their antenna models, and that can add up very quickly in terms of costs. Televes makes some good quality low VHF TV antennas as well, but there's not a lot of low VHF antennas on the market today. This one here does represent a good value though overall, I think, for the price and the performance.